Welcome to Marketing People Love. I'm your host, Jacques Spitzer, and today I have the cat's meow, or in this case, I guess you'd say the dog's woof. I'm not sure if that's a saying, but I have Terri, the co-founder and CEO of Jinx. She's so talented and so smart. You'll be hearing how they took this pet food brand that started as direct-to-consumer and has moved into nationwide retail at over 5,500 locations. Terri shares with us how her and her co-founders took some of their learnings and insights being part of the early days of Casper mattress as it exploded and the success that they had there, and started this pet food brand that has pivoted over and over and taken those learnings to achieve now its best consumer scores to date. I've been following Jinx's journey from afar for years, and Terri, we are here and Working People Love, and I can't wait to hear what this feeling is like for you being 5 years in. I've been aware, you said 5 years, so I've been aware of your journey over the last 5 years. I'm curious, you are joining me today on a podcast talking about marketing people love, and obviously that's been a big part of your background in the consumer space. Like, even just starting out this podcast, what if you were to say, like, I can't believe blank is happening right now with Jinx? Like, what is that opening feeling that you're sharing this brand with the world?
Sure. Well, first and foremost, thank you for having me. And I'm excited to have this conversation. My entire career, or the majority of it, has been in marketing, and I am a consumer first and foremost. And so I fall in love with brands, and I wanted to make sure we were building something that people and dogs would fall in love with. But in terms of your question, I can't believe we have raised $50 million. And we're in over 5,500 doors nationwide in the United States. It's like this thing started as a dream and a concept and a mission to build something better. And here we are on this like pretty incredible trajectory that I don't think, if I'm being honest, any of us could have predicted. It's like we wanted to build on the Chewy model and have this direct-to-consumer experience with a subscription commerce model that made it easier and more convenient for pet parents to access better food. And then we had this opportunity really to pivot into retail in 2022. And that has been like the major tailwind for really propelling the business forward on a completely new trajectory, where our year-on-year comps are like so impressive and so incredible. And so I just constantly stop and think about how this thing is now in a place that I could have never predicted.
Yeah, so let's do this before we get too far into it, because I literally started you with one of the biggest, headiest questions I can possibly start with. I'm curious, what has been the journey from your all success at Casper? Because when I first met parts of your team, it must be 5 years ago now, I remember hearing about this all-star cast, this group of people that were taking all of these learnings and applying them. And I don't know the details, but I have to imagine 5 years later, there's a mix of like, wow, yes, we knew a lot of things that have been incredibly useful and helpful, but also all the things you had to learn the hard way. But like, take me back to coming out of your experience with Casper. What did you feel like was the sort of the seed or the moment of like, I've had these experiences, I want to apply them to a healthier dog food option for pet parents? Take me back to that moment and what you felt like you'd learned at Casper at that point.
Well, another thing we couldn't have predicted is starting a business is really, really hard and consuming. And so for all of those people that are thinking about being entrepreneurs, it's like a real consideration point. And one question I was asked as I was going through the shouldn't I do this kind of exercise was, could you see yourself doing it for 10 years? And if no, like, it's probably not the thing to throw your blood, sweat, and tears into. So I feel like that was a really good filter question. But Casper was an incredible opportunity to be a part of something that felt bigger than a mattress brand. I have a bed behind me in my office that literally has a Casper mattress, a Casper topper, Casper pillows, Casper sheets, Casper bed frame. So it was like we were obsessed. We loved the founding team. We loved the brand. The marketing was incredible. And being really early employees there, we got to see and touch and feel everything. And every move we made had a really big impact. We learned how imperative it is to build a direct relationship with your customers, to listen to their feedback, to use it to enhance the brand experience, and then also create momentum from your most loyal base of buyers. And so really, we started Jinx with the same mentality. We were trying to solve for the issues that are shared across most dog parents, and that's from education and buying through delivery and feeding. We wanted to deliver a product that is objectively superior from most options you will find in retail, and that's measured by food digestibility, palatability, and stool quality. And we wanted to create an authentic and direct relationship with our customers to really understand the product reception and overall feedback. And then throw all of that into a recurring model that optimizes for convenience, since this is a replenishable pantry item. And so we felt like we had a really good playbook to build off of. But in the early days, we learned that building something from scratch and launching it into an unprecedented time with the introduction of the pandemic and a host of other cultural issues that were dominating and consuming us at that time, it was really hard. It was an uphill battle. It was a financially unpredictable time for a lot of people where we were all forced to stay at home. And so having these opportunities to do experiential marketing and meet people in the field and host really cool dog events wasn't really an option.
Yeah, I was
And
taken
so,
off the table.
yeah. And so it was this variable that we could have never predicted, and definitely played a really big role in how we thought about launching, announcing, and scaling the business. But I really think the first lesson learned was you're never going to get things right. And so letting go of perfectionism and focusing on making faster decisions that can be tested and proven is really, really critical to an early stage. And I think it's a really good thing to care so deeply. It's very natural, because then you feel so deeply when you are building something and your vision is coming to life. But every decision costs money, and every indecision costs more money. And so accepting that with multiple business partners or co-founders, accepting that you can't agree on everything, but you must be aligned in decision making and goal setting, frankly, is something that we appreciated as we navigated those formation stages and kind of got the project off the ground. But the focus never changed. It was like build a brand that people become obsessed with, just the same way that we were obsessed with Casper, right? Which when you really strip it down, it was like it was a mattress in a box.
Yeah.
But they had built so many emotional anchors and use cases outside of that brand that it felt like so much more.
Yeah.
And then I would say, like, you know, the third and final lesson was it was just really important to realize that with that playbook, it was designed with the intention to build something special and be really clear about your value proposition. But it's really important to know when to pivot. And I think it's a really necessary part of business. And frankly, accommodating the consumer is something that you need to do in order to grow. So we've collectively agreed that how you pivot is how you prosper, and we can never be too precious about change or evolution, because with the introduction of things that you can't control, like the pandemic or an election cycle, we really needed to create a more universally appealing product. So we modified our original diet from adult life stages to all life stages. We cost optimized our supply chain so we could pass along those savings to the consumer. We showed up at a more competitive price point, which generally made us more attractive and appealing.
Yep.
We cut our marketing spend when things just weren't returning a positive ROI. And then we expanded from the subscription commerce model into retail once we felt like our product was in a really good place and had kind of like the best chance to be recepted really favorably on the shelf. So there was a lot that translated from that Casper experience, but we were certainly, you know, in a different moment in time and tried to be really responsible the way that we were thinking about our growth.
I loved the how you pivot is how you prosper. I don't know if that is that a quote that you grabbed along the way, or is that a Terri original quote? What is this quote?
No, I read it a long time ago because I think I was always just such like a planful person and linear thinker.
Mhm.
And going through an entrepreneurial journey of like creating a product or a service, it's all about learning.
Mhm.
And you don't have all of the answers. And I think you can have some really good ideas, but those ideas need modified. And I had a really hard time of letting go of the original vision
Yeah.
and the original mission and like what we were set out to do. And the reality is like consumers will tell you what they want and what they need.
Yep.
And so you have to be open-minded to really like evolving your model. And so I had read a lot of work around just like building agility into your team and your mindset and being able to realize when something isn't working or isn't working as hard as you need it to work. And I lifted it and I kept it with me because it was such a good token when we were thinking about, okay, like we worked so hard and so thoughtfully to develop strategy or a playbook or a plan or a campaign. And then it's like you put it out into the wild, you start collecting data points and it doesn't go how you thought it was going to go.
Yep.
So it's like time to change. And if you don't change, that's when I think you start to experience some of that complacency or some of that failure.
Yeah. I love what you were saying about the almost like the preciousness that you can have with your brand and marketing. And not everyone has the ability to have the impact that you as a founding member has, right? Like you can make certain decisions. I'll give you kind of a weird small one, but I was texting with a client recently and we sent them over some assets and it was on a pink backdrop. And the pink backdrop is within their brand standards, but he's like, we would never run it out with pink. And I was like, all right, fair enough. Like we can go in and key out the background and change it to a more neutral gray or something. And then he said to me, well wait, I think I still want to run the pink ones because what if they perform like 20 to 30% better? Like that's a good point. You probably should run both. I get that we all have our own likes and dislikes and everything else, but people will literally tell us what they like based on their actions. And it's like, we as a brand, yes, you can have your own. I'm not saying anything goes, but I think it's a pretty good, simple example of like, the immediate reaction people might have is, oh, well, I wouldn't use that because, even though it's not damaging to the brand or anything else, it's just sort of like a preconceived notion of, well, no, we don't do that because, instead of what's possible if. And I'm also curious, Casper is a incredibly powerful marketing experience coming out of that. I actually use mattresses all the time, like when I talk to people about marketing, because I explain to people, well, if you had asked me the hardest possible thing to sell through the internet without someone actually trying it, I would have told you mattresses. Like, who buys a mattress without having laid on it first? I mean, to me, that was crazy. And since then, I've purchased multiple beds online. I've known, obviously, hundreds of millions, billions of dollars of mattresses have been sold online. And so I'm curious, like, the experience that provides. You said earlier, it's not just a bed. I'm not trying to harp on the Casper experience, but I recognize that experience shows you what's possible with your advertising. And I'm curious, what are some of those emotions or things that you realize you wanted to infuse into Jinx, having had that experience before?
Yeah, so I think if you start with the product and you're just simply stating like it is a bed that comes in a box, and it's really important how it feels because that informs how you sleep and ultimately like how you perform throughout your day. Like you swim a little further upstream and you think about like why sleep is important and what sleep powers me to do and how great I can be when I have a really good night of sleep or an uninterrupted night of sleep. And so we kind of took the same approach and used the same mentality with Jinx. We were like, yes, the final format and delivery mechanism is food, but nutrition is really important. It powers everything we do. And when you think about your general well-being and investment in nutrition, will never go wrong because good nutrition can make you feel great and make you be great. And so we really wanted to convey certain values that felt really foundational to what we were building, which was transparency and trust. Like you are putting something in someone's body And so we take that very seriously. We always say, like, we would never put anything in a bag or on a shelf that we wouldn't feed our own dogs. We wanted to appear really fun and joyful. I think a lot of dog food brands specifically come off as clinical and telling the pet parent what to do. We wanted to create more of a conversation around food. There's a lack of transparency. There's a lot of conflicting information. Do you listen to the internet or a veterinarian or a nutritionist when your dog is having some type of food reaction or food sensitivity? And so we really wanted to create a conversation that felt friendly and not judgmental. And then we wanted to feel very real and authentic in the way that we showed up. And so it wasn't like a brand that was concocted in this room with scientists and this idea around, a dog and its lifestyle that nobody can relate to. It's like, we want to be the dog at the dog park that like everyone runs up to. They're happy to see, they're well received, they're like easy to play with. And so we really started to kind of like form this archetype around the kind of like dog we wanted to be. And the values.
What breed of dog is it? I'm gonna really put you on the spot.
Yeah, I mean, I would say like I'm a big sucker for rescue dogs, and so I would say like a mixed lab.
Okay.
And you're kind of looking, you're like, what else is in there?
Man,
like, is it some?
I'm glad that you had a perfect answer for that, Terri.
Well, listen, it's like it's not about being perfect. It's not about like purebreds and presentation. It's like it's like back to reality. And all dogs can give you such a sense of companionship and can like really give you an incredible bond. But I think in terms of our personality, we wanted to push it and be like a little bit more unique and have a tone of voice that felt different from what the category was saying. And so we really leaned into those values. And I can very proudly say that over the course of the past 5 years, like those values have remained unchanged. Our nutrition philosophy has remained unchanged, and we continue to optimize for what we know is working. And that's working on like the consumer appeal perspective, but then also just like the more objective data points as well, like digestibility, palatability, and stool quality. That are really like the best measures of a good premium dog food. But again, they're guardrails, right? So it's like you kind of like play and create within those guardrails that you set up, knowing that things will change, but our values have really stayed in place.
Yeah, it's something that we actually use as part of our branding process is asking people like thought exercises around dog breeds or car, what type. I feel like people buy certain types of cars or, so it's like they're all sort of self-expressive benefits of who you are, who you aspire to be. A lot of cars will get you from A to B. And as a pet parent, like there's a lot of different breeds of, like, let's say specifically dogs. There's so many breeds of dogs. And to your point, they all provide some level of companionship, but wow, like they can be dramatically different. I mean, I've seen people with, tiny dogs, huge dogs, like quiet dogs, very loud barky dogs. Like, I mean, you get this whole spectrum. So even within this consumer group, there's a wide variation in the breeds of dogs that they have, the way that they think. It's a very broad demographic of people, and they all have very different things that they value and look. So it's like you're providing something. When you listen, if you ever do listen back to this podcast, I want you to listen to the way that some of the language you use is really interesting. You said putting nutrition inside somebody, right? So you said somebody as if it's a human, and then you said pets, and that you can just tell there's a certain level of care and thoughtfulness that is certainly at the same level as if it were another person. I thought was interesting. And so I'm actually going to ask you about specifically thinking about advertising to somebody about their pets, where yes, there are benefits that nutrition has. You mentioned stool quality and some other things, but overall, I think purchasing pet food is really interesting. And this is just me speaking as a marketer, not necessarily as the consumer mindset, but just what type of pet food you buy actually says a lot about how you view yourself as a consumer, as a pet parent, whether or not you're like, yeah, I mean, the bulk kibble from Costco is A-okay with me versus I'm going to literally chef up fresh meals for my dog every night. I mean, there's a whole spectrum out there. And so I'm curious how, like, where you all have found your footing and your point of view in the fact that there are so many people with so many different ways of approaching having a pet.
Yeah. So listen, we're really embracing this notion of dogs as family, not dogs as pets. And so that's why you'll often hear us say things like, we treat our dogs like we would treat our kids, because in a lot of cases, they are like the thing that we are spending the most time with, the one that we are making decisions on behalf of. And so it's really important just to kind of like stand in a position of, we want to really deliver against our mission, which is to elevate the way we care and connect with our dogs. And so if I'm going back, it's like historically, there hasn't been a lot of transparency in the pet food category. And there's a lot of conflicting information. So depending on your sources, if you run into a feeding issue, it's really hard to figure out like what to actually do besides just testing a bunch of different types of diets. What I do know is that when we started doing research in 2019 and we were going through the formation stages of the company, we met hundreds of industry professionals. And the makeup of this population is like scientists, formulators, animal nutritionists, veterinarians, manufacturing experts, and so forth. And not one of those people fed their dogs fresh food.
Oh, interesting.
We were going through the formation stages of the company. We met with hundreds of industry professionals. And again, like the most trusted, most experienced, most credentialed people in the field, ranging from scientists and formulators through animal nutritionists, veterinarians, and manufacturing experts. And not a single person fed their dog fresh dog food. And that's all that you heard about in terms of what was growing, what was trending, what was really sexy and successful in the D2C landscape. And so we really went back to our hypotheses and we were like, okay, this might not be the trend that we want to get behind. And while we know dogs love the taste of a softer format food, it's usually dry formats that are easier to process. They have less contamination risk, and then they deliver all of the essential nutrients in every bite. And then obviously on the customer side of things, they're typically more cost effective for most households. And so our stance has always been that we take our roles as pet parents very seriously, and we would never put something in a bag or on a shelf that we wouldn't feed our own dogs. You can achieve a whole and balanced diet through pantry-friendly food formats. And then you can mix and match products to really create a meal that is both good for your dog and that your dog enjoys eating. And so the benefits of a healthy diet are obvious. So you can tell when you see a dog, meet a dog, if they've got clear eyes, if they have a soft skin, shiny fur, they're a healthy weight, they've got good mobility. Those are some of the things that really are like the outputs of a good diet. And it's definitely a reflection of the choices we make as pet parents. And so I always kind of underscore how important it is to take on that responsibility and make a good choice for someone who cannot make the choice for themselves, but also that an investment in nutrition and wellness and well-being is really critical to keeping your dog happy and healthy and around in terms of having a good long lifespan.
Yeah, it's I hadn't, when I became a parent of a child, it was definitely, it put things on another level for me around, all of those decisions that you have to make. It was one of those things where, I hope this makes sense. When I became a parent and I realized how many decisions I had to make, and really my wife was making a majority of them for this little being, it was like, you do make them as an adult, like you make these decisions for yourself on a daily basis, but you don't think of them in the same way. or with the same criticalness. And so it's interesting because the reality is that pets are similar in the sense that like you are responsible for them as living beings, to nourish them, to house them, to do all the things that you want to care for a pet. And the idea of, like we say, pet parent, which I think honestly it was probably a new term within the last, we'll say, decade or so. Like I don't know that that's really a term that at least when I was growing up, I don't remember that necessarily being a term. I think people are starting to just maybe see some of those connective tissues behind, like, you are responsible for this living being and you need to make decisions for it. And for so long, I think people pretty much didn't make any, it was sort of like most products that we're seeing now going through this sort of cleaner, more transparent revolution. I mean, personal care products are obviously doing that. Our food chain is doing that with organics and non-GMO and all these things. It's like, it's almost like it wasn't a problem. I mean, I don't know the history of pet food. I'm sure you do. But I have to imagine it wasn't a problem until it became a problem, in the sense of, I'm sure that in the, we'll say 40s and 50s or something, like, you know, I'm sure pet food was manufactured in a way that wasn't cutting corners and wasn't malnutritioned and wasn't all these things. And then over time, it was like, people wanted to get it cheaper, get it faster, cut more corners. It goes on and on and on to the point where probably what dog food became, you know, in the 1990s into the 2020s became unrecognizable, just as much as you see headlines about, oh, you know, I don't know if it is even true, but I remember seeing, you know, ground beef at Taco Bell is like 50% soy now, you know, these type of things where it's like you start cutting it with other ingredients. Is that what happened in the pet food industry? That's just my intuition on probably, if you were to look at the last 50, 60 years of food history in pets. Is it that things were shifting on consumers and they didn't even know that they were?
You know what? I think it was largely, there was kind of a single philosophy on this type of diet works for this type of dog, and it went unchallenged for a very long time, decades even. And when you think about that philosophy, our challenge is most of us have dogs in our households that don't resemble wolves. And there's this whole kind of nutrition statement based on the idea that your dog has these predecessors that were wolves, and it should be eating the same type of diet, which is highly processed and high protein. And aside from all of the physiological differences, so like different jaw and teeth structure because wolves are hunting their prey and consuming like a whole animal in some cases to feed themselves or to feed their pack through domesticated animals are mostly spayed and neutered, so they have different metabolic rates and different digestive processes. There's so many differences, and so when you think about a dog today and its lifestyle and its activity level, like what becomes appropriate then? And high protein diets are really great for very active dogs, and so I'm talking about dogs that are outside roaming around acres of land on a farm all day, dogs that are in training to be law enforcement animals, et cetera, et cetera. If you have a dog that is sleeping 50% of the day or more, lounging on your furniture or at your feet while you're working from home, those dogs don't process high protein diets very well. What happens is if they're not burning off that protein, it stores as fat. And then it leads to one of the most alarming statistics, which is over 50% of domesticated dogs in the US are clinically obese. And that fat storage leads to a host of different health issues, and has become a really big problem, among others, like overpopulation and animal abuse. That really is like one of the leading drivers of early fatality in some of our domesticated pets. And so I think Jinx, alongside a bunch of other new age 21st century brands, are just challenging that idea and trying to hop on these trends of premiumization and humanization to really craft diets that are better for the animal, but also are easier to understand from the pet
Yep.
parent's perspective. And so I've noticed probably 15 years ago, Blue Buffalo launched and largely had the same philosophy, which we felt like was still dated and wasn't necessarily really relevant for the dogs that we have in our households today, but they did a really good job marketing. And that to me was like one of the first case studies where talking to the consumer and really anchoring the brand and the intention of the product in an emotional wrapper was something that kind of caught fire. And we looked at that as a really good example then to create an updated product with a compelling value proposition that worked for most modern dogs in our modern households with excellent marketing. And that really was like the formula and the spirit for which Jinx was created.
So it's interesting because I can tell just from our short discussion that it's like you have almost like a scientific experiment. You have a hypothesis, you have intention, you have these values, right? That even if you look back now, you mentioned earlier, you look back now at those initial values and they have not changed either at all or not much, right? However, you also have 5 years of learning and so many things that you would assume would work a certain way and it goes a different way, or you think it's going to do this and it does that, or you think people will like this and they like that. And so I'm curious what has been sort of some of the either the biggest or some of the biggest sort of learning lessons along the way for you as someone that's like looking at the course of the brand, where it's like, oh, I thought people would resonate with this and they didn't, or I didn't think this was that big of a deal maybe at first, but now I'm realizing it is a really big deal to people. I'm curious what you feel like comparatively to where you started and what you expected initially, what the market has taught you back. And the market's a very broad, I mean, you can say consumers, whatever, but it's like, we can all have the best of intentions, and communication is, I guess before I it's kind of a question / statement. That's what's interesting about communication is you can say whatever you want, but it's also how it's received on the other end. And so your brand has been through 5 years of learning that dialogue with consumers. What has been some of those ahas along the way where you're like, well, despite feeling like I know a lot, it's humbling because blank?
Yeah, listen, I would say the direct-to-consumer model allows for a direct connection with our customers or prospective customers. And so having that 360-degree feedback has really empowered us to not only kind of prove or disprove some of our hypotheses, but then also just collect data and really mine through it to understand kind of what the trends or what the thematics are. But, I would say that because as consumers, we're paying more attention, there's actually quite a lot of room or opportunity for customization and personalization. And so instead of having almost like this one size fits most type of offering, we've really decided that there are dogs that have a lot of allergic reactions and sensitivities to some of the most common proteins or fillers found in most commercial grade dog food. And so what we've tried to do is create some optionality where we've got poultry options and non-poultry options. We've got grain inclusive options and grain free options, because we really want to make sure we're accommodating the changing needs and kind of dietary restrictions of our pets, because we are paying more attention. We see what their energy levels look like before, during, and after feeding. We are picking their fur and their coats off of our furniture and our clothing, so we know when they're shedding, which is also a sign that something's going on. There's a sensitivity with what they're eating. And so there are all of these kind of behaviors and outputs that we look at and we should listen to. And Jinx is really taking those and processing and trying to think of how we can create some more custom solutions that work for most dogs based on some of their preferences, some of their sensitivities. And with that, then building out a system or a product portfolio where you can kind of mix and match, knowing that all products have gone through the same filters and the same criteria. So we're always going to use premium proteins like organic chicken, fresh salmon, farm-raised beef. We're always going to include a patented probiotic that's protected through the cooking process that helps with gut health and overall our digestive process. We're going to fill that ingredient panel with foods you recognize and you don't have to Google. And then you can say, like, this protein's working for my dog, but I'm going to mix and match a dry format with a wet format or a topper that doesn't add a ton of calories to the meal and really works together to make sure it's interesting and delicious for the dog and they can get excited at mealtime, but it's also a complete and balanced and well-rounded diet. And so I think like we've tried to find or strike that happy medium between personalization and designing foods on a dog-by-dog basis and providing options that can be kind of mixed and matched that can work for a lot of dogs without severe sensitivity.
Knowing that now, you know, starting out 5 years ago, knowing that you would want to get to that point. So how do I put this? I always feel like, especially when you're starting anything, sometimes having the background in something is super helpful because you have all those experiences to draw on. It allows you to not make mistakes that others may make. I mean, there's all of the things that, you know, experience brings. But then there's also like some beauty and naivety around, like, if someone had told you, well, for Jinx to be successful, you're going to need this many different variations of the product so that people can do this. You may not have decided to start the business in the first place. You know what I mean? Like, it can be paralyzing to look at a mature brand and see where they're at and know that, like, that's actually what it takes to provide the best possible product. I'm curious how that resonates with you because, I mean, if you were to start all over again, it's like, I'm guessing you'd been like, okay, we need 10 times as much money. We need to like launch with this many SKUs. We need to go straight to retail. I'm sure there's so many things that you would feel. I'm curious how that resonates with you because I feel like I see that a lot with people where 5 years later, they're like, oh, this is where we landed after all of this learning. But it could be, that's a lot for a brand to have, all of those options, grain-free, non-grain-free, you know, poultry, no poultry. How does that resonate with you as someone who came out with so much experience before you started at Jinx, but also now 5 years perspective on where you're at?
Yeah, I mean, listen, like we talked about pivoting, and part of that pivoting decision is listening and like really allowing yourself to be humbled by what the consumer is telling you they want. And I think in that vein, like it is not easy to do food. It is not easy to do consumer packaged goods. It is not easy to pivot a business from direct to consumer to retail. And so those were all hurdles we had to clear in order to survive the past 5 years. And a lot of it is determination and perseverance, but a big component, which you alluded to, is financing. And we have really high, what we call MOQs, so minimum order quantities. And so it is an expensive business to be in because you have to commit to producing at minimum like 40 tons of dog food per recipe per run.
I can do the math. That is like 40 tons.
That is a lot of dog food, but
80,000 pounds.
It's a lot. And to meet those MOQs as a small brand that is testing and learning and figuring things out, like you have to get a lot of things right. And so I think like we were so thoughtful going through the formation process that we landed really close to pin, but it still left so much room for learning and listening and optimizing and improving and getting things better and closer to what the consumer was asking for. And so we could have never done it without the capital. But I also think that we were solving for ourselves as consumers in some sense. And so we knew the issues. We were frustrated dog parents. We were confused that there were hundreds of options and so much noise in the space. And there wasn't one thing that worked for our dog. And even though they were different ages and breeds and sizes, like usually there's one brand that you can get behind, and we couldn't. And so we really identified those issues and we tried to put forward solutions that solved the majority of problems for us and kind of held our breaths and hoped that it solved a lot of pain points for other pet parents in America. And so it's been this continuous process of learning and trying to be really smart with the capital that we do have, but it is a capital intensive business, and that is like the one thing that has remained consistent since we launched.
At this point, I started this off before we were recording saying, hey, I'm proud of you. I'm proud of this journey. It's very cool to see. I've had this experience a little bit, weird analogy, but my wife and I would go to the country music festival in Nashville. And every once in a while, we go there. We've been going for years and years. And so we'll see, like a small size Sage and Kelsey Ballerini's up there. And I'm watching her. I'm like, she's going to be a star one day. And then sure enough, like 2 years from then, she's doing like headline stadium tours, those type of things where you see someone starting something in those like early phases, and then people kind of see what feels like, oh, maybe that was just a year or two. It's like, no, that was 5 years, to your point, you started this saying that if you're not willing to do it for 10, it's like 10 years in, Jinx will look very different. And I'm curious at this moment, just kind of as a nice wrap up question, is what around the brand you are most proud of today? Like with all of the progress that's been made, all the pivots, all the learning, what are you most proud of with Jinx as a brand today?
I am most proud of our customer satisfaction scores. I think that we can have a lot of biases as we think about what we've built and how much money we've raised. But at the end of the day, if the consumer isn't happy, they will tell you. And when we've done customer surveying, I'm always so amazed at the results once they're kind of tallied and finalized and in a presentation format, because having these high scores like in the 80s and the 90s% regarding customer satisfaction and how the product is being received and what the dog has made progress before the diet and after the diet, those insights are something that I never let go of. And there's something that I think help us all get out of bed every day and say, like, how can we make this better? And having that mentality and that kind of continuous improvement spirit, I think, is what continues to get us through some of the challenges, some of the headwinds, some of the hurdles. And so to me, it's like our customer satisfaction scores, our product reception, the community that we're building is so incredible, and it's so satisfying and it's so fulfilling that it really helps us to keep going. And being a small brand in a very large category, we created this thing to be a disruptor, and we created this thing to look and sound and act different. And so I think a lot of that customer energy and sentiment continues to give us the conviction to keep chasing that mission.
Ultimately, it's like you know that you're making the impact through the product itself with the pet's health, which is hugely, it is the most important thing, truly. However, also getting that positive feedback from the people, it's like, because you know that you're supplying that experience to people. It's like Jinx is providing that level of satisfaction to people in their relationship with their pets. So it's like, it's interesting. It's like, even though they're saying we love Jinx, they're also saying, I love the decision I'm making as a pet parent, which is a really powerful thing to give someone that level of confidence and care when it comes to, I mean, there's not that many things that it takes to care for a pet. I mean, obviously, I say that full well knowing that there are people that will do certainly extreme things for their animals. I've seen people take their cats for a walk, like I get it. But, feeding your pet is one of the primary ways of showing love and care, and so hearing that they have that level of satisfaction is also, I think, deeply satisfying, knowing that you're giving people that level of peace of mind around their educated decisions they've made for their family, for their pet. It transfers back onto them, which is really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Can I
I'd
read
love,
you
I'd
some of
love
the
to, I'd love to
statistics
end out with
from
some
our last
statistics.
survey?
Give me some good ones.
Okay, so these are all in support of kind of the customer satisfaction commentary, but we have tens of thousands of 5-star reviews across D2C and then all of our retailer.com sites. 95% of dogs
Ugh.
prefer the taste of Jinx to their old food. 75% of picky eaters finish their bowls and are more excited to eat at mealtime. 81% of dog parents say that feeding Jinx has improved their dog's poop and reduced gas. And 65% of dog parents have seen noticeable improvements in their dog's health. And so, again, like those are, I feel like that's a smattering or a slice of some of the stats that I
Yep.
read where I'm like, we're onto something. I know this is working. We need to get in more households. We need to get in more bowls. And
Love
that's,
it.
again, what
Terri,
we remain
thank you
focused on
for
doing.
investing the time with me today. This has been just as interesting, if not more interesting than I thought it would be. I'm thrilled for you all at Jinx, and I appreciate you taking the time. All right, that's what we have for you today. Thank you for joining us on another episode of Marketing People Love. If you enjoyed this conversation, please make sure to check out Jinx either online or in one of your local stores, and subscribe to this podcast because you know you never want to miss an episode.